So I don't know if you guys noticed this or not. There wasn't a whole lot of MMA over the weekend. There was PFL 10 in my hometown of Washington, D.C., but there was not otherwise a great deal happening. But there was something kind of instructive that happened over the weekend. Namely, there was a brawl in the NBA. LeBron James, now a Los Angeles Laker. It was the opening night in the Staples Center against the Houston Rockets, another team out west that are very, very good. I know MMA fans are wondering, why are you talking about this? This is an MMA show, because it's related, and I'm going to tie it all in. So give me just a moment if you can. But there was this brawl that happened. There's a lot of different factors at play. Brandon Ingram, a man who appears to be incapable of fighting his way out of a wet paper bag, is part of the problem. And then these two other gentlemen, Chris Paul and Rajon Rondo, got into it after Rondo allegedly spit in Chris Paul's face. You can see some of the highlights here. And then, of course, Chris Paul pushes him away. Rondo throws that punch, and a whole melee ensues. Brandon Ingram comes back in looking like an idiot, and he throws a punch. And so there you have it. Now, it got separated quickly. LeBron James there, you can see, who was friends with Chris Paul in real life, separating them. All right. Now, you're asking, as you look at some of these highlights, what on earth does this have to do with anything? And I think the answer is it actually has a lot to do with UFC 229. Now, the events are not related in the sense that one caused the other. I don't mean that, but I mean the reaction more widely and how it was handled tells us a lot about MMA, the UFC, and then the fighters involved from 229. And everyone's had an opinion about the brawl, but we haven't seen any brawls subsequently in other sports until this time. Although Jose Mourinho out in the English Premier League also getting up and losing his mind, which was hilarious to see. But let's talk about this for just a second. Why am I bringing this up? Well, a couple of things. Look, all of the various players, quite literally, or some of the other stakeholders involved in this brawl, they all came out, and the coaches talking about how regrettable it was and how sad they were to see it and how unfortunate it was, and there's never a cause for it. All of them doing the common things that you're supposed to do to save face in the public, right? And there aren't any real concerns that this is somehow indicative of how the NBA is. Some people were alarmed that this happened like on the opening night at the Staples Center, but you don't see the same kind of hand-wringing. Conor McGregor gets in a brawl with Zubaira Tukhugov, and yes, this one over in the UFC was a little bit worse and a little bit more involved, and certainly a lot more heated. This was a little bit spur of the moment. The one at the UFC was a lot more involved and simmering and long-standing, but nevertheless, you don't see these cries and these clutching of pearls that the world is ending because a couple of grown men wanted to settle a dispute through violence. Grown men often want to do that. They're just not allowed to do that. So it was interesting to watch the media reaction. The media didn't really beat up on the NBA. They didn't really beat up too much on the players. No one really got hurt all that bad. So if you're wondering what the media reaction was, certainly the UFC got the worst end of it, but for maybe reasons you could understand. You could understand that a melee that was involved outside of the octagon and inside of the octagon would be frowned upon. You could understand that in a fist-fighting sport, when the contest leads to real fistfights out beyond the confines of the sport itself, that people get naturally alarmed. So that part to me, while unfortunate and maybe a bit of a double standard, kind of makes sense. But that's not actually why I brought it up. I brought it up for not those reasons. I brought it up because I wanted to talk about how the league handled it and what that means for the UFC. So did you guys see what happened? The league, within about 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer than that, weighed in. And they brought all of their hammers down. They gave Chris Paul 2 days. They gave, I think, Rajon Rondo 3. And they gave Brandon Ingram 4. In a public release, they explained why. They took out each person's game check. So it looks like Chris Paul got fined $500,000, but it's just what he would get for 2 games. Same for Brandon Ingram. Same for Rajon Rondo. So they acted quickly. They explained their reasoning, and, you know, the coach of the Rockets came out and said, oh, this is too much, and Luke Walton of the Lakers was like, there's nothing wrong with our locker room. Everyone is going to say the things they need to say to support their players and save face, but I'm pointing here that the league acted quickly. The league acted with authority. The league acted, what I would say is, almost in a lenient way, but certainly authoritative enough to let it go. Now, the UFC doesn't have the same problems that the NBA does. The NBA is not regulated by the Athletic Commission. So the UFC is going to say, well, look, they're already going to get punished by these people. Do we really want to heap things on top of them? And I can understand that from a structural standpoint, you don't want to go to a space where you're just being super punitive. That's an advantage to a degree that the NBA has in situations like this. At the same time, however, they acted quickly. They came out and explained their reasoning. They came out with statements. They came out and acted like a professional organization that tries to shun these kinds of things, that tried to put the lid on top of the pot before it boiled over again and other questions remained, rather than just deferring to somebody else. They took control, is my point, of the situation. They have more control to take, but whatever leeway they had, they took. I didn't see the UFC do that. Not saying it's the end of the world that they didn't, but there's a difference there. But to me, it was the real difference here is how the players were punished. Now, the NBA has a degree of latitude. They can not do whatever they want, but there are things written down and a degree of flexibility they have in awarding punishments. But a lot of that stems from the collective bargaining agreement. The players, as a unit and a union, put down on paper with the league what they could be punished for, in what ways they could be punished, what the league can do, what the league can't do, what rights they have, and so forth. So, for example, if they had wanted to, it's written in the CBA that before you get suspended, you have a right to meet with the NBA and have them look at the video and explain why no punishment should befall you or that it shouldn't be that bad. You have rights. You have abilities. You have things you can do to mitigate the worst of it. Because they collectively bargained for it, they made it work in unison, and as a consequence, that probably saved them a little bit of the worst end of the punishment that they maybe could have gotten. Now, did they exercise all of their rights? I don't know. But here's my point about this. People keep blaming the UFC, and they could have acted with, they could have taken more control of the situation at UFC 229 if they had wanted to. But the bigger point to me is really about the fighters. Look, there's a lot of things that pass with the words MMA journalism on it that don't deserve to be called that. There's actually very little MMA journalism that ever exists anywhere. Most of the time, it doesn't even really exist. There's very, very few guys actually practicing it at the high end and the low end. People often wonder why MMA media has there's a low opinion of them. It's because y'all won't ask the questions to the people in power that you need to, and you won't voice your opinion for fear of retribution, whether it's a fighter or somebody else. That's why the opinion is low. But if there is one issue where they have absolutely done their job, if there is one issue where they have hammered it home, it is with this one about the benefits of being employees, about the benefits of getting together, about having your own collective bargaining agreement and what that might mean. And would it solve all the problems? I don't know. Would it even have solved this problem? Hard to say. Here's what I do know. At least you'd have some kind of procedure. At least you'd have some kind of protocol to follow. At least you would know what kind of things would befall you. There'd be a degree of flexibility involved. The commission would still take their pound of flesh, but there would be some kind of understanding about these processes because you would have picked up on it. And the reason why people are upset about Conor not getting suspended and maybe nothing should happen to Khabib is because no one wants to take ownership of this situation, not the UFC and not even the fighters. You can get mad at the media for a lot of things. This ain't one of them, folks. This ain't the hill to die on because you will lose that argument. The reality is we have shed in the media as much light as we possibly can about this. And the fighters have decided collectively to this point to do nothing about it. So I got to be honest, I'm a little bit tired of hearing arguments that things are unfair and that you weren't treated right this time and that things were unequal and it could have been better. If that's the way you feel, then do something about it. Get off your ass and sign a Project Spearhead card, or don't, and then just keep living under the whim of people who have all the leverage over you. I can point to the things the UFC did and the things the UFC didn't. I can do that all day. But in the reality, they don't have as much leeway and leverage, frankly, leeway as the NBA. They don't have as much freedom to act as they do. They're a little bit of in a different situation. You guys are not. You guys can do something about it. And you continually decide not to and then wonder why the stars get special treatment. You know why the stars get special treatment? Because you enable them to get special treatment.